Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, founder and host of Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm so delighted to kick off our 5th season with Janie winning. Janie is somebody I met through the dispute resolution field. We hit it off, we've stayed in connection, and I've been so excited to learn more about Janie's background. For all of you in the construction industries, the movers, the shakers, the planners, the negotiators, you need to hear what Janie has to say about how to use mediation as a risk management tool, how to save those big dollar projects from going awry. I really liked what she had to say when she talked about, this is, people from different sectors of the construction industry coming together under a big project, oftentimes never having worked together before, and yet all having a key role in making this project a success, bringing it in on time and bringing it in on budget. Nothing worse than something going over time and massive more money than what you expected. Please stay tuned to our podcast starting in just a few moments as Janie Winning, a project neutral mediator arbitrator with the American Arbitration Association. Listen to what she has to say. And I love again what she said about from fractures to foundations, navigating conflict and resolution in construction and beyond. And one of the things that she had to say, these kinds of disputes, difficult conversations, they're not evident when we're negotiating coming together, but they can quickly evolve. So how do you do that? And Janie's specialty is not just doing mediation, but really being a dispute consultant throughout the process. And she says they start with tiny fractures in conversations and relationships that eventually crack and divide. Exactly the thing we do not want to happen in a major construction project. So don't go away. Tell all of your friends, colleagues, attorneys related to the construction industry, this is a must-to listen, a podcast with Janie Winning, ADR neutral, specializing in the construction industry. Well, welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. And today our guest speaker is Janie Winning. And I think, Janie, your last name is so appropriate in the field of dispute resolution, right?
Yes, I've been told that. As like, especially in mediation where everything you want is a win-win. You want the most productive outcome for both parties, if at all possible. So, but yeah, it's a cool name. And I put it on my license plate.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I like that. So Janie, everybody has a background, everybody has a story. And, while I gave an overview of your background, so to speak, but I'm always curious, how did you get into this line of work? And I know you come from more of a construction background, right? And so tell us a little bit about how that evolved for you.
Okay, so long ago in a faraway land, I graduated with a finance and marketing major, and I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and that's the United States Air Force headquarters. And my first job was with Grumman, now known as Northrop Grumman, and back in 1990. I ended up being in the cost accounting program, and they made no bones about it when I got hired that I was there to fulfill a quota. I was a woman. And I grew up with computers, strangely, in the 70s and 80s, and I was not afraid of the computer. So they told me that's how I got the position. As I went through the 90s, I coded, I wrote the code for scheduling software for the United States military for the depot maintenance of military aircraft. That took me from Dayton, Ohio to Ogden to Warner Robins, Georgia, and eventually to Sacramento, where I am now. When I got to Sacramento, I stayed and I had met the love of my life, who I am still married to, and that was in the year 2000. And I moved over into construction. And from there, and it was kind of a situation where I was kind of rebuilding from the ground up, and I got into construction and did scheduling for construction. And when you're a scheduler, and how I ended up here is when you're a scheduler or have that kind of information on a construction site,
Mhm.
you almost always end up with information that people don't want to hear.
Mhm.
And I was not always the best at communicating that. I was more like, this is what it says, read it and weep type. And that, I quickly found out was not productive, right?
Mhm.
So, um, eventually, I mean, I had lots of great mentors who, one, taught me construction, um, I was able to work by their sides. I learned huge amounts from them. But one of the things I always watched in the meetings is when the executives came to town and you had all these A-type personalities in the room, the executives always seemed to be able to handle that. And so I started watching them, and it's like, I'm going to emulate them someday. I don't know how, but I'm going to emulate that someday because I want to be the person of reason that can gather everybody's ideas, as
Mhm.
passionate as they are, and help the whole team move forward in a productive way. So that was the start of me. I really watched my mentors. And then in 2017, I had completed my last construction build and I moved over to the owner side. And if you're in construction, going from a contractor to an owner can be a big switch. And the owners brought me over to actually think out of the side of the box and help them with a huge amount of construction related problems, how to get back on board, how to get through all of this without all these contractors over these um, um, 50 or so projects filing a claim. And so that got my wheels thinking again that we need structured, repeatable processes to move through construction to kind of give them a mechanism to do that. So that's what I worked on, and as I started Googling on how to have crucial conversations and how to talk to people who aren't in agreement, I found out that there was a master's in dispute resolution at Pepperdine, and I signed up and I went and got my master's, and I just fell in love with the ability to have um, techniques, mechanisms, strategies. When you're in a room full of people that disagree, there's nothing more satisfying than to enter that room that's full of disagreement, but leave. They might not be best friends, but they leave in an amicable, fair resolution and a plan. So, I think construction, you have to do that during construction. You just can't wait because every day you miss on construction, if you start pushing out that end date, it's a lot of money for both the contractor and the owner, and nobody wins. And so a lot of times you're entering the room where it is not a win-win. It's however you get out with the least amount of damage, and that's what they consider the win. So, that's what I've been doing since, and that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, it's so interesting. Having been a former career counselor, I like to hear people's stories because, sometimes we have no idea where this will end up, but we just sort of navigate through, find out what appeals to our interest, and then find the opportunities. It sounds like that is something you certainly have done.
Um, I've had quite a few pivots in my career, but I try to make that pivot, as you say, something that I'm interested, something I'm good at, and something that I feel is going to be of service and, of course, make money at the same time. But
Sure.
and it doesn't always make money, because
Mhm.
sometimes you just want people to stop arguing, right? And
Right,
so
right.
you just sit down and it's like, I know this isn't anything formal, but we just need to sit down and pause and reflect,
Mhm.
assess and reflect, and then choose a productive path forward. And
Right.
that's what I try to help teams do.
Right. Great. Great. I remember one of the things that I found so interesting, given your line of work, was that unlike other like employer-employee relationship or a family dispute, or I do a lot of family-owned businesses, just partnership disputes, and but in your world, it's oftentimes you have these various parties coming in representing their various trades on a project. Sometimes they've never worked together before, but for the project to be successful, then getting through these conflicts or differences early on becomes critical to managing costs and managing relationships, and so it was really interesting to realize that, oh yeah, okay, not everybody's going to know each other or have worked together before, and so you truly are bringing very diverse and divergent parties together, who somehow have gotten into conflict. And so when you're in those kinds of situations, Janie, what do you feel is, I guess, a stimulus or a motivator for why impasse happens, and why communications break down or conflict erupts? What happens in your world?
Escalates. So you are correct. Every single one of my meetings is and facilitations is multi-stakeholder. There are architects, engineers, contractors, owners, there are construction managers.
Mhm.
And the reason, and you are correct, even if the companies are the same, the individuals they put on the project are usually not the same and have not worked that completely together as a cohesive group. And if there's a couple people that know each other, then they're going to side. If there is a difference of opinion, they're going to start choosing sides of people they're more familiar with. So and construction, when you're building something, you have I don't even know if this is a thing because you're um, you've studied the brain, but they quote A-type personality.
Mm.
You actually want that as in the leaders of construction, those that are in the field, that general superintendent, you want him to have the A. You don't want someone out there that's second guessing themselves.
Right.
So then you're going to have a whole bunch of A types together potentially. And they're all going to believe that their way is correct. And actually, they all might be right. Because in construction, we have this thing that's like there's 6 ways to Sunday. And so they all might be correct that this is the way to do it. And it's sitting down and stepping back and figuring out what is the best way for this particular team. And if you go to another project, that same answer might be different. So, yes, it is multi-stakeholder. You're likely to get into impasse because one, not only have the teams not always have worked together, you're most likely building something that's never been built before. Owners nowadays it's just like the fast food restaurant, they want their buildings now. So the building industry has come up with processes to try to get it to them faster. And the faster you get something to somebody, they just want it faster than that. So that's one of the things. And then the space where you're building it on, if it's a ground up build, who knows what's in the ground? They do all kinds of studies and everything and geotechnical studies all before the project and have good idea, but you always really don't know. And then if it's a renovation, if you have a set of as-built and the as-built aren't correct. So there are, from the beginning, as quite a few ways where disputes can start, including the contract. Because if you look at construction contracts, to me, there's like a set of divorce papers that people are using to get married. And
Wow.
because they're just meant to, oh, they have to do it exactly this way. And if they don't do this way, then they're not going to get a thing. And then it leads to everyone needling each other because for the sake of the contract, right? So
Okay.
tons of ways that you can just start and within a month be out of alignment.
Yeah. One thing I know that you've mentioned in our communications, they oftentimes are tiny fractures in conversations, but will eventually crack or fall apart if they're unable to reach some resolution. And so, again, what you just said there was again, I hadn't thought about it in construction that way, but yeah, you have a contractual obligation. Then you certainly have people coming in from different trades who have their ideas about how to do things. It may not be in sync with what other people are expecting or believe are the right ways to do it. And so it sounds like it's easy to then have some maybe unrealistic expectations and
Different angles and perspectives that are all
right.
trying to come up together because they truly, that's how you get alignment eventually. They truly want to get things done. They truly want to work together. They truly want to make money for their company. So if there's always some common bond that you can kind of tie into, because people think they're disagreeing, and I just think there's different perspective and angles. And can we take parts of those angles and make them meld into an action plan? So
yeah, well, that reminds me then of how important it is from an emotional intelligence basis then to self-manage and not just react and then behave in ways that actually escalate the conflict, but instead, be more proactive in terms of, okay, what am I hearing here? What are they really saying? Do I understand? And that's where we get into the communication techniques. And so really pausing and listening to what's being said. And then, I always like to talk about the 360-degree perspective, rather than arguing or being confrontational in conversations. It's really more about what can I learn from their perspective, and then how can our ideas be integrated, which is what you were just saying.
And they don't always come into the room wanting to learn from each other, right?
Yeah,
so it is kind of a dance when you're in the room with the people that have all these different perspectives. And certain decisions are going to cost more money or less money. So the person in charge of the money is always going to be pulling toward that end where that may or may not be the best answer. And if it's less money, then some people might not like that particular answer. So trying to understand, and you are right. To me, this tiny fractures, even throughout the project day, leaving people off an email thread, disrespect in the slightest of ways, but you don't really call it disrespect, but leaving a mess behind, taking your lunch and then bringing your lunch in and eating. It's like some of these things are dismissing the importance of an outcome that someone else has put a lot of work and plan into, and silence someone who's overly kind. That's some things I look for. One-upping, mispronouncing names, or not even using names. Those are all things I start to look for, and who's using it, who's not. And if someone's actually using everyone's name, that also stands out to me. It's like, okay, they're here, they want things to work, and they want relationships. So you're right. When I walk into the room, I hear a whole bunch, even if nothing's being said. So
yeah, well, 55% of how we communicate is
not about what we say. It's about, our body language, our facial expression, the eyes, how we, our posture. And so, it speaks volumes without saying anything, so yeah. One of the things that I'm aware of and would like you to share here is that you refer to continuous dispute resolution techniques. And so I want you to elaborate on that. But I also want to ask first, is that do you engage in any kind of like what I call pre-mediation work to prepare parties for engaging in that joint conversation through mediation?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
So the pre-meetings to me are so important. I want to back up on the continuous improvement. And when you're, everyone starts out a construction project, whether it's small volume or you're building a stadium or arena, but you obviously do not start without a plan. Because of all the things we mentioned before, that plan shifts and changes. So one of the continuous things I do is every 90 days, we look at that plan. Is that still the plan? We've had change this, and this, and now we have to do all those changes, but those aren't on the original plan. So how are we integrating them into the original plan so that it influences the contract milestones the least? So I taught continuous dispute resolution is even review times. There is a tendency to just submit something by a deadline, just throw it over the wall. Then I'm too busy to review it. So I find the one thing in the contract that it doesn't comply with, and I throw it back over the wall. And meanwhile, you can go up to a year without resolving just one piece of paper. Or I say a year because maybe I'm emphasizing the worst, but even if it goes 1 or 2 weeks, that could mean millions of dollars on certain projects. So I talk about review times, like 1-2 reviews when the first revise and resubmit that we call comes back. Instead of throwing it over the wall, have a sit-down meeting. If you still have comments, have a sit-down meeting with everybody with the goal of resolving it before anybody walks out the door, so that everyone can keep moving with the same momentum as they were a week ago. So the pre-meetings, definitely, when you do come up to, and there is a time impact, there is a cost impact. We have something in construction that we call time impact analysis. It's the TIA for short. And whether and how you present that, you're trying to present merit for time and compensation. On some projects that you have the ability to do time and compensation. On other projects, we might be able to do compensation, but we can't miss the deadline. Let's just say, for instance, the Golden One Arena. You miss a deadline and it's going to cost a lot of money, not just to the people building, but they've already planned Paul McCartney for October 4th. They've already planned the first NBA game for October 25th. You can't, and those happened like 2 years ago before you even started construction. So you don't even have, the necessity and the imperative to keep planning and keep continuous planning and keep everyone moving in the right direction is really high. So, because you cannot miss the deadline. So we got to figure it out somehow.
Okay. So it really is like, being clear on the end goal and making sure everybody understands that, and to try to encourage, motivate, redirect parties to, I guess, keep that vision in mind of where we need to be by what time.
And keep pulling out the common ground. And that's what you can do in the pre-meetings. When I moved over to the owner side, I was asked to help the contractors and the engineers come as prepared as the owner. Because if you come and you're not ready for that conversation, you're going to have another meeting. And you hear all the time that, oh, we've had this meeting, the same meeting for a year.
Yeah.
and we go nowhere. So it's the goal of the pre-meetings, and there might be more than one, because I'll go to a pre-meeting, and if I feel like they're still not prepared, and it's not just a pull my hat thinking, oh, they're not prepared. If I continue to ask questions that they don't have the answers to, as like, we really need these answers before we're sitting across the table from
Right.
the other party, and they need to have the same answers. And not the same answers. They need to be able to answer the same questions. So
Okay.
that's the importance of pre-meetings, is getting everybody thinking about one, not only what your position is, but what's the position when you say this answer, how is the other party going to respond?
Right.
And
Okay.
try your best to know that. We can't always know that 100%, but you pretty much know. If you're in the field and you hear guys talking all the time, you're going to have beers with people after work. You kind of know what's going to be said if you bring up a certain subject. You know what their position, whether you agree with it or not. So let's make sure we're prepared to have a productive conversation about what you believe the other party is going to say, and do it in a way where we are not using charged words. So
Okay.
that you're speaking so that you can be heard, and they're listening so that they can understand.
Okay.
So
Well, that leads me then to, how, our own personal comfort zones, for example, in handling conflict or handling disagreements. I imagine that plays a lot into it as far as how parties come together. Or what do you see? Because you mentioned type A, and type A, generally likes to be in control, in charge, and tend to believe that they're right. And so, and nothing wrong with that. But again, when there's disagreement or conflict, then that doesn't get us very far in terms of reaching some kind of resolution. So what do you see in your parties as far as, their individual personal comfort zones?
Well, you see a lot. I try to keep meetings short. In construction, people get into construction because they want to build something.
Yeah,
And if you're sitting in a room too long, then to me, you are probably going to get the worst of their personalities. They're already in disagreement. Now they're being confined to this room, and they want to be outside, and they want to be moving forward. So when when you enter a room, there's always people that are going to be the ones that are wanting to speak. And it's just the ability to facilitate that and show up front that I'm going to ask you to speak, and then you're going to speak. And then they're going to, of course, everyone tries to interrupt and talk over people, and the ability to shut that down. And some of the ways they shut it down is you look at the person that's not talking, and you ask them a question. And it's amazing the wisdom that usually comes out of that person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes that settles everything down. It's like, you mean he's been thinking like that all along, and I didn't even know. And there's almost always at some point in the conversation, as lively or passionate as it might get, and I try to keep it from getting too passionate, but as lively or as passionate as it could get, there's always this aha moment where everyone's like, oh, that's what's going on. People in charge of the money is like, oh my, if that's true, if they do if this, then that. There have been situations where one side is like, you're a liar. And then the table, I was actually in a room where the table just went up like this. And it's like, okay. And fortunately, if I can put in a plug for someone called Dr. Dupree, I knew what to do at that point in time. It's just, okay, everyone pause. And I just said, this is really good conversation, but we're probably not being productive about it. Let's just take a break.
Yeah.
And you've taught me that it takes people 18 minutes to reset. So I take an 18-minute break and have everyone reset, get a drink of water, get a snack. And that's another thing. If it is going to be a long meeting, I make sure there's water. I make sure there's snacks. I have this thing where I put chocolate on the table. It's very hard when you're to argue when you're eating chocolate.
Right. Well, that's a good one.
But so not to say that the passion does not come to a head sometimes, but it's the ability to take that same group and refocus. They come in and inevitably they've thought about what's being said, and it's just like a new room when you all come back. So
yeah,
it's kind of exciting. I love it. So
yeah, that's great. I mean, that I like to sort of joke a little bit as far as, in the old days of mediation, or in my earlier career in mediation, because I've been at this for about 30 years now. We used to reach resolution by starvation or exhaustion, and we didn't take breaks. We weren't, back then the practice was not that considerate of individual needs. And sometimes people, they're tired of fighting, they're tired of having differences. And so it has changed, because I know, just did a 2-hour mediation, well, particularly doing Zoom too. I tend to break it down into 2-hour sessions, and to give people time to think things over, and go back out and apply what we've come up with. So it's usually a sequence of meetings in some of my mediations, but taking a 10-minute break after being on screen is important, just to get up and move around. And just that physical movement does affect how the brain works then, and counteracts what we were talking about earlier, as far as cortisol and adrenaline being charged up, and which tends to fuel some of our disagreements. Now, I'd like to have you share, Janie, what do you feel causes some conflicts to escalate while others tend to go more smoothly along to resolution? What are the factors that you use in your mediation practice that you feel that you do to try to facilitate that smooth riding, shall we say, rather than escalation?
One is we're in business, we're in corporate business, right? So money talks. And maybe shifting a little bit over to the evaluative side and talking about the cost of being right.
Oh, yes.
Because you could be absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt right. How much money, not just money, how much money and intangibles, i.e. people's emotions, times, their inability to get other deadlines accomplished, or they have to work till midnight to get other deadlines accomplished because they're sitting in a room like this. If you look in a room like that, you don't have your lowest man on the totem pole in the room, right?
Yeah.
So, and if it's multi-stakeholder, that room is full of people that are being paid quite well, and should be. And so that to me is those are soft costs, but soft cost that somebody maybe is not going to go against your particular budget, but it could go against your boss's budget. And the cost of being right, it's like, are we really going to have this meeting again and bring all of these people who their time is money? And besides, stretch out the emotions, because as long as these people continue not to get along, if their project is ongoing, that's going to inevitably affect the ability of the project to finish on time. If you could be in a situation, because you have a lot of time people on their own team, you'll have, like on the owner team, you'll have the construction manager, the project manager, the owner, the architect, and the engineer. As time goes, they might have different ways that they believe in solving it, and all of a sudden the internal team starts arguing. So a little bit going on the cost of being right. And then, as I mentioned before, the pre-meeting, making sure everyone comes prepared, having an agenda.
Yes.
So agenda controls the time. And then your issue management is like, what have you accomplished today? What were those outcomes? Did those outcomes meet your expectations and requirements of satisfaction? And what are your next steps? Do you know all those answers? So make sure in your agenda that you're addressing all of that. And then when you have action items, have names. Don't have winning CM strategies on there. Have Janie winning, and it's going to be done by January 6th.
Right.
And then if you may say January 6th, that's most likely someone in the room is like, that's too late.
Yeah.
I need it before that. If we don't do this before that, I'm going to miss this deadline. I'm going to miss my ability to put in my steel order, and I'm going to miss my slot in the steel fabrication order, and I might not get it back until April. So it's good to put dates, because all of a sudden when you start saying dates, because if meetings are so full of your 2-week Timmys and your next week Nancy's, and the next week can go on for infinity. But if once you say a date, that can click lines in everybody's brain that, that works. Yeah. If you have by January 6th, I don't need it till January 16th. So we're good.
Okay.
So, as we mentioned before, the choice of your words, choice of questions is, why did you do that? I mean, even your tone, or it's like, or, so tell me a little bit more how you came to that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Two different,
Yes.
you're going to get 2 different answers to that, or one, you might not get an answer at all. So with statements, ultimatums, and then an empathetic mindset. And that's the whole thing. What are they going to say when you say this? And know that. And know their side of the argument. And sometimes that influences your side. So.
Yes. Yes. One of the things, well, again, I know we've talked before about, your tone, the words you use, and just for our listeners know, we somehow have a defensive reaction to when we're asked, why did you do that? And it naturally sort of brings up a tone that comes across to the receiver as accusatory, or that they have to defend themselves about their choices. And so shifting that whys to more of a, well, say more about that, or tell me what was going on that led you to this decision. Really opens up the possibilities of what comes out, and it's much more informative. Now, you mentioned, Janie, I loved how you did this, applied the words risk management to your mediation and construction. Say more about that.
Well, construction, the industry, when you say the word mediation, to them, that's a charged word. It also, and the old school mediation, when you wait all the way past your discovery and your depositions, and it's just before you get to court and you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, that to them is mediation. And so not understanding that these mediation techniques can be used all the way along, so you don't even end up at deposition and you don't end up at discovery. So and that, to me, in construction, then that's a charged word. So I stay away from the charged words, and I use risk management, because everyone knows they need to have risk management on the job. They might, if you tell someone, it's like, hey, we need to do this because just to avoid disputes. Well, we don't have disputes.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't think so.
But no, they really, it's like, they were like, we don't have disputes. It's like, but we do have issues, and we do have risks, and we need to be looking ahead and identifying anything that could make that risk become a reality. So that's why I choose risk management, mostly because I want to resolve everything during construction.
Mhm.
And then if you get all the way to the end and you are in a position where you need to file a claim, I still try to call it a risk management, and just so that the risk at that point is going to arbitration or going to court, and staying away from that risk and costing that kind of money and intangible damages to your organization and to your staff.
Right.
So, when I put my resume out there for construction projects, I do scheduling, um, claims avoidance, and risk management.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I love that change of terminology to fit the industry. But again, it just shows so powerfully, how much words matter. And so by reframing it, redirecting it's really all the same thing when we get down to it, but it's again, the technique, the strategy, and so forth. So one last question, Janie, is that I get the impression that you might be involved from the start of a construction project and part of the project planning. Is that an accurate interpretation?
Yes, it's accurate. It was accurate when I was actually in construction in that really full, like, project neutral coat.
Okay.
I worked all the way from, like, on some projects writing what we call the EIR, which is the environmental impact report that has to be approved by the city before you even do anything, all the way until the owners are cutting the ribbon and walking through the doors. I enjoy that. And I sometimes am hired for that. And then sometimes I'm hired to just helicopter in saying, hey, we have an issue here, or our team needs some training, or we actually have a dispute and can you just coach us through it? So that we have one meeting, it's productive, and we're done and out. So, but there are things also called, in some contracts, require a dispute resolution board. And that is a panel of 3 that is on the project from the very beginning, so that if you have issues like this on the construction site, it goes to them and they help resolve it. And the contract, you have to go with what they're finally deciding. You can dispute that, maybe. Sometimes that's binding, sometimes it's not. You can dispute it at the very end if you feel that their decision cost you a lot of money. But there's also that dispute resolution board sometimes is contractual, and that team will go through and be there for the entire project. I have heard now that they're also trying to have phase dispute boards, because the trades are so different from the very beginning. Like your concrete and excavation and all the details that go into that, and everything they may or may not have to deal with underground. Would be nice to have a dispute resolution board panel that really understand that. Then you go out of the ground and you have your structure going up and your finishes. So it could be, and your closeout. So it could be that you have, in some contracts, a phase dispute resolution board, which actually might be quite helpful, because those people will be more geared to understanding exactly what's going on at that time of the construction.
Yeah. It's some really interesting ideas. I'm glad we're having this conversation. So, it's like really from using dispute resolution techniques then to move beyond the fractures in communication to building a foundation for growth and to project completion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Janie, where can people learn more information about what you do and your sort of unique approach to construction conflicts?
Well, I do have a website, a www.winningcms.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn. In January, in the middle of January, I'll be on a panel at the Construction Law Forum in Tampa Bay. So you'll actually hear me interface with lawyers and in-house and outside counsel, and me as a consultant, which to me will be really interesting. And I'm also speaking in April at the Project Management College of Scheduling. I'm a fellow there, and that'll be in Tennessee. So there's places where, and I usually post on LinkedIn when and where I'm going to be actually engaged in speaking or just in attendance if people want to have a conversation.
Great. Well, I know that we're to the end of our interview here, but I will let you know that I'm going to bring you back so we can talk about food and the role it plays in people in conflict. How's that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, very good.
Like,
Well, Janie,
don't eat a sub sandwich right before you're going to have a long speak.
Yeah, very much so. So a lot of interplay there in sort of a pun on words there. But Janie, this has been so fascinating. It really an area that I haven't had a lot of exposure to in the construction trades, but the notion of sort of a concierge mediator who's actually there to work with organizations on an ongoing basis to help them address issues and before they escalate. And so it sounds like that's sort of the role that you're playing in the construction industry, since you've got such early involvement and may be called upon throughout the project. So fascinating. So Janie, so appreciative of you being here today and sharing with our world another way of decoding the conflict mindset and what that means, particularly in the construction trade. We see it all around us. Hardly anything exists without some kind of construction. So it's a very integral part, and getting it done and saving money is critical. So thanks for what you do.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree, for this opportunity. As always, the conversation is engaging and it's always rewarding. So thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. Well, very good. So, folks, you have it. How to use dispute resolution strategies. It's a variety of techniques and methods, not just a mediation per se. And so there's a lot more to dispute resolution as the umbrella or the field. And mediation is just one of those tools. As you mentioned, coaching and things like that. So don't hesitate to reach out, folks, because conflicts can be easily resolved the earlier we get involved, and before they get out of hand and cost us high emotions, cost us lots of money, and we can prevent damaged relationships and reputations. So there you go. Decoding the Conflict Mindset, Dr. Deborah Dupree, your host and founder, and listen in, share this episode, and let us know what you think about going beyond conflict, from the fractures to the foundation.
Thank you.
Join us again. Bye.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed listening to Janie as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. Again, I love her analogies, tiny fractures, from fractures to foundations, cracking and dividing. All of those, speak so poignantly to the construction industry. And I love her application of risk management. When it comes to the legal intervention, the proper tool is mediation, helping navigate through those difficult times, those challenging conversations, and when things fall apart. So that's what I love is that a new way of thinking about dispute resolution in the construction industry. It's really about mitigating risk. So maybe mediation isn't the appropriate term for this particular kind of work. That might be applicable in other situations too. So let's rethink how we can repair those tiny fractures through facilitated dialogue and difficult conversations to prevent those cracks and divides. Again, thank you for listening. Pass it along. It's available anytime on YouTube. And if you liked what you heard today, please leave a comment, like it, pass it on, share it. Let's get it out there. A new way of thinking about dispute resolution in the construction industry. Risk management. We see it all over the place, everywhere else. So let's apply an existing concept to an ongoing source of conflict. Again, Dr. Deborah Dupree, your founder and host of Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Come on back. We'll have more coming your way. Subscribe if you haven't already. Your participation, your being part of the community is what makes this thrive and go beyond survive. Thank you again.